Welcome viewers to Global Conflict Explained. Today, we're going to break down one of the most significant periods in modern history, the Cold War. The Cold War shaped global politics, economics, and military strategy for nearly half a century, influencing conflicts, alliances, and international relations long after it officially ended. By understanding the Cold War, we can better comprehend the origins of today's global power structures, including NATO, the United Nations role, and ongoing tensions between major powers. So, before we start, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Origins of the Cold War. The Cold War began in the aftermath of World War II. Although the Allies, primarily the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom, had fought together to defeat Nazi Germany, ideological differences quickly emerged. The US promoted democracy and capitalism, while the Soviet Union championed communism and a centrally planned economy. Tensions grew over Europe's reconstruction. The US initiated the Marshall Plan, providing economic aid to Western European countries to rebuild their economies and prevent the spread of communism. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union solidified control over Eastern Europe, establishing satellite states and imposing communist regimes. The division of Germany, culminating in the Berlin blockade of 1948-49, became an early flashpoint that symbolized the growing divide between East and West. Major alliances and military buildup. To counter perceived threats, both sides formed strategic alliances. In 1949, the United States and Western European countries founded NATO, a military alliance guaranteeing collective defense. In response, the Soviet Union established the Warsaw Pact in 1955, uniting Eastern European communist nations under a centralized military command. The arms race also escalated, with both superpowers developing nuclear weapons and delivery systems. The stockpiling of nuclear arsenals led to the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, a tense but stable deterrent that prevented direct conflict between the US and the Soviet Union. Conventional forces and intelligence networks, including the CIA and KGB, further contributed to global competition. Proxy and global conflicts. Although the US and the Soviet Union avoided direct warfare, they engaged in numerous proxy wars worldwide. Conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Angola, and the Middle East were influenced or supported by one of the superpowers, turning local disputes into global contests of ideology. The Korean War, 1950-1953, pitted US-led UN forces against North Korean and Chinese troops, while the Vietnam War saw the US trying to prevent communist expansion in Southeast Asia. The Soviet-Afghan War, 1979-1989, further exemplified Cold War-era proxy warfare, as the US provided support to Afghan mujahideen fighting the Soviet invasion. These conflicts were costly in human lives and resources, but avoided direct superpower confrontation. Ideological and personal conflicts. The Cold War was not only fought on battlefields, but also through ideology, culture, and technology. Both sides competed to demonstrate the superiority of their political and economic systems. Propaganda campaigns, media influence, and educational programs were widespread. Space exploration became a symbolic arena for competition. The Soviet Union launched Sputnik in 1957, the first artificial satellite, igniting the space race. The United States responded with NASA's Apollo missions, culminating in the 1969 moon landing. Sporting events, scientific achievements, and cultural exports were all leveraged as demonstrations of national strength and ideological legitimacy. Crisis points and near conflicts. Several crises brought the world perilously close to nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 is perhaps the most famous example, when the Soviet Union installed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from the US coast. After tense negotiations, both sides agreed to remove the missiles, averting catastrophe. Other flashpoints included the Berlin Crisis, the U-2 spy plane incident, and the multiple confrontations in the Middle East, influenced by Cold War powers. Each crisis demonstrated the delicate balance of power and the constant threat of escalation inherent in the superpower rivalry. Detente and shifting relations. By the late 1960s and throughout the 1970s, both superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, began to recognize that constant confrontation carried serious risks, especially in a world where nuclear weapons could lead to mutual destruction. This growing awareness pushed both sides toward a new approach known as détente, a French term meaning relaxation of tensions. Détente was not about ending the Cold War, but about managing it more carefully. Instead of direct hostility, both nations emphasized negotiation, diplomacy, and strategic stability. One of the most significant outcomes of this period was the initiation of the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, which aimed to slow the arms race by limiting the number of nuclear weapons each side could possess. These talks led to landmark agreements like SALT I in 1972, marking the first time the two rivals agreed to place limits on their nuclear arsenals. Another major achievement was the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, which restricted the development of missile defense systems. The logic behind this was simple but powerful. If neither side could fully defend itself from a nuclear strike, both would be less likely to initiate one. This concept reinforced the idea of mutually assured destruction, maintaining a delicate balance of power. However, despite these diplomatic breakthroughs, the Cold War rivalry did not disappear. Proxy conflicts continued to erupt across the globe, particularly in regions like Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. Both superpowers still competed for influence by supporting opposing sides in local conflicts, supplying weapons, funding, and political backing. This showed that while tensions had eased on the surface, deep mistrust remained beneath. The end of the Cold War. The Cold War began to wind down in the late 1980s due to internal economic pressures in the Soviet Union. Political reforms under Mikhail Gorbachev, including glasnost and perestroika, and the wave of democratic movements across Eastern Europe. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 symbolized the collapse of Soviet influence in Eastern Europe. By 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved, formally ending the Cold War. The United States emerged as the sole superpower, and former Soviet republics transitioned to varying degrees of democracy and market economies. Legacy of the Cold War. The Cold War left a lasting impact on global politics. NATO and other alliances remain influential, and military doctrines developed during this period continue to shape defense planning. Many contemporary conflicts have roots in Cold War-era alignments, proxy wars, and ideological rivalries. Technological advances, from nuclear weapons to satellites, were accelerated by Cold War competition. The ideological divide between capitalism and communism shaped international organizations, economic policies, and cultural exchanges for decades. Even today, US-Russia relations, as well as tensions with China, carry echoes of Cold War dynamics. The Cold War was a multifaceted struggle that reshaped the 20th century. Through ideological rivalry, military buildup, proxy wars, and global influence, it defined the relationship between superpowers for nearly 50 years. Understanding this period is key to making sense of today's international politics, alliances, and conflicts. While it lasted decades without direct conflict between the US and Soviet Union, the lessons of diplomacy, deterrence, and competition remain highly relevant in the modern world. If you liked this video and would like to see more like it, please give it the thumbs up, leave a comment, and click the button to subscribe.